We're all in this together. Oh, okay. That's good.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
All right, should we start?
Let's.
Say hello. Okay, hello and welcome to the 8th edition of We're All in This Together, a project that Alastair and I have been working on and developing since the beginning of quarantine in Argentina. It's a space for teachers to share their experiences, resources, and ideas. Now, I would like to give a very special thanks to our sponsor, Advice Bookshop, who have been supporting and training teachers for many years, without whom this wouldn't be possible. And also, we've got their contact details here, so if you need their help, they'll be there for you once more. So don't hesitate to contact them. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for, I give you Alastair Grant and Dr. Stephen Krashen.
Okay, I get to talk? This is it? Okay.
Good afternoon, Dr. Krashen. Thank you
As you
so much
probably
for
know,
joining
let me
us.
tell you what my name is and what it isn't. My name is Steve Krashen. I prefer people don't call me doctor. I prefer people don't call me professor because there's only one Dr. Krashen, and that's not me. A far better scholar than I'll ever be. That's my son, who, believe it or not, is a math professor. Can you believe this?
Wow.
So he's the real Dr. Krashen. He's the real Professor Krashen. When I grow up, I want to be like him. I want to take the first few minutes and discuss the last 50 years of progress. And it won't be too hard. So you say in Hebrew, standing on one leg, doing it. The last 50 years, 45 years exactly, has been dedicated to a couple of core ideas. The first one is there are two ways of getting better in language. You can acquire language, that's like picking it up subconsciously, and you can consciously learn it, know the rules, etc. The second one is the official position. It's the official position of governments, it's the official position of textbooks, and most people believe it. And we've made some inroads into just telling people there is another possibility, but we're a long way. We're still suffering with this. I have to confess to you something. I'm still under the influence of conscious learning, even though I know it's very, very limited. We feel, Alfie Kohn uses the word undertow toward conscious learning. And there are times I wonder, gee, maybe I should write this down. What's the rule? Let me master it. The brain does acquisition very well. It doesn't do conscious learning very well. The first point, how do we acquire language? How does this happen? How does this method work? Very simple. If I talk to you, and I'll do it. I'll give you a language lesson. I'll use a language I am sure most of you have heard before. Some of you may have studied. And I'll give you two quick lessons, and you tell me which lesson you like better. Here's lesson number 1. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte im Voraus sagen, dass meine Meinung, Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson? If I kept talking to you like that, you think you'd pick up German? How about if I repeated it? How about if I said it louder? How about if I said it and then you repeated it back? How about if I underline the words you don't know and we could do exercises? Or I write it on the board over there and erase every 5th word. You guess what the word is. None of those things work. They don't do anything. Now, lesson number 2. Das ist mein Kopf. Kopf. Verstehen Sie Kopf? Ja? Gut. Hier sind meine Ohren. Ohren. Ich habe 2 Ohren. 1, 2. Gut. Und hier sind meine Zigaretten. Ja, meine Zigaretten. Ach du lieber Gott. Ich habe keine Zigaretten. Ach, Zigaretten sind nicht gut. If you understood lesson number 2, not every word, more or less, I did everything necessary to teach you German. Here's how it happens. We acquire language when we understand it. When we understand what people tell us, when we understand what we read. And it happens without our knowing it. It's a subconscious process. And once we've acquired something, we're usually not aware that anything has happened. So conscious learning, on the other hand, you can feel it, you can touch it. I know this rule, you can put it in your pocket and walk away with it. For some people, it's very, very satisfying, but it's not the way we acquire language. The methods that work are based on our research, are based on what we call input. Work I've been doing with Beniko Mason, we just wrote one of the world's shortest papers, I'm proud to say. The paper I've shared with you guys, I think, is like 550 words, trying to make it even shorter. One of the great revolutions is write short papers, because no one has time for this long stuff. And in it, we say the best input is comprehensible, highly compelling, so interesting you forget that you're listening to another language. There's also a lot of it, and it's what we call rich. That means there's a lot of things going on in the input that help you understand new words. Now, the application of all this, I've just gone through the whole theory, not bad. Let me give you the application. The beginning stage, we think, of all second and foreign language, listening to stories. One of my privileges growing up middle class is that I grew up in a story-rich environment, as most of you did. Mommy and Daddy told us stories. We had stories in school all the time. My sister, who's 4 years older than I am, and she thinks she's my mother, she's been so nice to me. Oh gosh, I don't understand it. I've never been nice to her, but she's always, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you need anything? Older sisters are amazing. Anyway, when I was 9 years old, she took me to the local library in Chicago, where we're living, and she got me a library card. And she got me into stories on the radio, Christmas time, stories. So they were everywhere. What we know from the research, children who hear more stories do better in everything in school. It is remarkable. And children love to hear stories. So do we. We all do. The children who don't like to hear stories is a tiny percentage whose parents don't like telling stories to them or reading to them. Stories is the answer. It's the answer to beginning language teaching, because our goal in the beginning stage, where we're telling stories and making them comprehensible, our goal is to lead children to reading books, which is the next stage. Free reading, reading that you select yourself, is the key to all advanced language acquisition. I wrote another 400-word paper on that, which I hope you have. It's overwhelming. It's fiction that counts, stories. We in the United States are under the influence of something called the Common Core, a huge mistake which they imposed on the public schools. I was one of its big enemies, still am. Nonfiction is better. Nonfiction's more macho, okay? Nonfiction's gonna prepare you for professions and all this stuff. Turns out, research by a number of people, including my colleague, Jeff McQuillan, if you look at what fiction books have and the kids read, there's a huge vocabulary and support for acquiring vocabulary. In fact, nonfiction, my favorite paper, Jeff McQuillan cited this, really good. If you read 1 million words of science fiction, which is about a year's pleasure reading for a native speaker, you'll pick up a huge percentage of academic scientific vocabulary and a lot of knowledge. I have to take a moment off and tell you about my cousin Evelyn. Evelyn is 93. I love talking about Evelyn. She was one of my mom's absolute best friends. The aunt-niece relationship, which was really wonderful. Evelyn is 93. She told me the other day, she's really interested in learning more about law. Her late husband was a lawyer. He knew so much about everything. She said, I'm going to take a course on law and learn about it. I said, don't do that, Evelyn. I have another suggestion. Start reading John Grisham novels. Wonderful stories about what goes on in law cases. This was a couple of months ago. She knows so much about the law now. She has all the terminology. 10 John Grisham novels are worth a year of law school. That's what most of our knowledge. Fiction, self-selected fiction, gives you grammar, vocabulary, spelling. Are you listening, Donald Trump? It gives you all those things, gives you writing style. And it gives you knowledge of lots of areas that you know more about science, you know more about history, you know more about practical matters from reading fiction, a great deal of what we know about the world. Also, reading fiction teaches you, this is the current research, the world is complicated. Simple solutions don't work. When you read fiction, you become the main character. You go through all the adventures the character does. You get a deep understanding of people. Barack Obama was interviewed by The Guardian. It's as if he read the research just before that. He says, you realize when you read fiction, you can get along with a lot of people that you thought were very different. And you avoid obvious, simplistic solutions. They're not going to work. This is what Obama said. Quite a contrast, need I say. So what Benico Mason has done is invent a stage which is really nice. After kids have done reading, they do a stage called guided self-selected reading. The teacher helps them find books that are right for them. Short, very easy books, graded readers, and a lot of them. I'm experimenting with my Spanish now on this. I'll tell you about that. And they read far more than we ever imagined. She wants her high school students to read about 300 easy novels in Spanish. I remember the French course I took in high school. We had a passage, it was based on the grammar, vocabulary, and a way of practicing it. Then the second one got harder and harder and all that. No, easy, 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 and lots of it. So I think my Spanish is improving. I've been following Benico's ideas. I can read authentic Spanish fine and have real conversations, but this is really pushing it much faster than I ever thought. The goal is to bring you to the point where you can select your own reading. Then we're done. The job of education is to make students independent of us. So they reach this stage where they know what's out there, they can select on their own, and off they go. I have just given you the whole theory and the entire pedagogical program. The theory says we acquire language when we understand it, and it has to be interesting. There has to be a lot of it. It has to be interesting texts that are rich in language. And what we want to do in our classes is stories and bring them to the point where they can read what they like. And it can be narrow. It can be in one area. If you only want to read legal novels or detective stories, I only read science fiction. That's it. And oh my gosh, you get so much out of it. I think we learn a lot. And I'll stop after this by experimenting with ourselves, with language. My best language is German. Believe it or not, I was a music student in Vienna in my years, a long time ago. And 60 years ago, my goodness. And my teacher and I had this big argument, and I quit after a couple of months. My parents, who were so forgiving of everything I did, let me stay the year in Vienna. I practiced the piano. I played little concerts with my friends, and I took German class. And I read a lot of junk, basura, we call it, easy novels, etc. I got really good in German, and that's what changed the direction. I did French. I got a passing grade in secondary school French under the condition that I never study French again in that school because the teacher didn't want to get embarrassed by my lack of competence. It was all grammar. I went absolutely nowhere. And he did it all wrong, but he was a very nice guy. Today I'm okay in French. I'm fine. After that is Spanish. I do not understand Argentinian Spanish at all. Nada. One of my best friends is the cantor in the synagogue, and he is from Argentina. And we speak American English to each other, okay? He's very good. And his mom comes up and visits. And I hang out with her. When I speak Mexican Spanish to her, she's fine, of course. Then she answers, and I have no idea. We now speak Yiddish, which is the grandparents' language, and we get along perfectly fine. Those are the ones I'm good at, and I'm going to come to a conclusion, not just showing off about my languages. I can speak reasonable Hebrew from 6 months in Israel. I know Amharic, Ethiopian, from 2 years in the Peace Corps in Addis Ababa, and I have been trying to make some progress in Mandarin. The languages I'm good at, I've had lots and lots of easy input. That's the point. The languages I'm not good at, I can't find easy input. It hardly exists. Easy stories told to me, easy things I can read, it's not there. Our goal in language teaching is to produce easy input. And this is what Beniko Mason and her colleagues are trying to do. So check out her story listening stuff, benikomason.net, etc. You'll find it there. The answer is lots of easy comprehensible input. That's what the application boils down to, and extremely interesting. Okay, thank you. I'll see you next week. Oh no, we're going to do a discussion now. Okay. I was going to go make another cup of coffee.
Great, Dr. Krashen. So, I mean, what you're talking about right now, correct me if I'm wrong, which I probably am, probably, I knew it.
I love this job.
Sounds a lot like what was originally discussed with the natural approach, but as I understand it, and reading some of the papers, one specifically that you very kindly shared with us, there's been a bit of a passing of the ways with
Oh yeah, yes.
Is that right?
I have good gossip for you.
Give us
Here's
some
the gossip. Who was it who said, if you don't have anything good to say about someone, sit next to me? This is Alice Roosevelt, daughter of President Theodore Roosevelt. Perfect. Here's what happened. I worked on Natural Approach, which I thought for its time was a huge step forward, really interesting. Worked with Tracy Terrell, the inventor, who was wonderful. His death was a big blow to all of us, and totally wonderful guy. And Tracy had been working with a publisher, I will not mention any names, McGraw-Hill, in producing a series of Natural Approach textbooks, Dos Mundos in Spanish, Du Monde, and all that. And when he passed away, the publishers asked me to take his place, which I thought would be a lot of fun. And I was assigned to work with 4 of his former students who were doing the hard work of the text. And of course, being Tracy's students, it was great, wonderful to work with truly dedicated practitioners who had experience and really understand everything. Was great. So we came up with things. Then the publisher inserted their opinion. They insisted that every unit, every story have a grammatical focus. Today we're doing future tense. I said, no, you can't do that. That just destroys the whole thing. We have a natural order of acquisition that you can't change. And if you give people enough comprehensible input, the rules they're ready to acquire are automatically there in the input. What we've called I+1 will be there. You don't have to program it, make sure it's, it's there and all that. We parted ways on that. I resigned. I changed my status from co-author to advisor and lost a shitload of money, let me tell you. So much, but it would have been the end of my career because I really didn't believe in what they were doing. And Bill Van Patten, in his book, very insightful guy, made this really good comment and said, what Natural Approach has become is a way of direct teaching of grammar, simply doing kind of meaningful exercises with the rule of the day. Of course, McGraw-Hill would not hear of this, so that was it. And I made like 5% of what I would have normally made, but it was absolutely worth it. So the idea is you cannot program grammar. You can't say, this is the rule of the day, that's the rule of the day. It doesn't work. You're much better off giving people lots of comprehensible input. In other words, the natural order is not the syllabus. The natural order is the result of giving people lots of comprehensible input. Certain things are early acquired, some middle, some late. And let me tell you about my practical experience with this. If something's late acquired, there's no way you can do it earlier. Can't happen no matter what the syllabus says. Some people think it's easier to change the student's brain than change the syllabus. No. I have these friends in Mexico, Cuernavaca, who own a language school. And I've known them for years. We get along beautifully, easygoing, great teachers, friendly people. And last summer, I stayed at their house for about a week. They put on a seminar and I was the guest speaker. So we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner together for, like 6 days in a row, which is when you sit down and talk about other people and complain, gossip. Now, my problem with Spanish and all intermediates at my stage, I have not acquired the ser estar distinction. I have learned it. I can tell you all about it, but it doesn't come naturally. It's not acquired yet. I decided, this is advice from Steve Kaufman, a brilliant polyglot. He said, don't worry about making mistakes. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. You know, don't aim for perfection. When you get there, no one's going to notice, etc. So I decided, and you can't avoid set a start. It's in every sentence. You've got a decision point, sometimes 2 or 3 of them. I decided I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to say whatever comes out. And I'm having lunch and dinner and breakfast with Spanish teachers, okay? It worked beautifully. I had such a good time with my friends. We got in such good gossip about everybody. And I had no idea whether I was saying it right. I just threw in what just seemed good at the time. Maybe I did it perfectly right. Maybe I didn't matter. And nobody commented. So the trick is, forget it. Get lots of input and it'll come on its own. That's why I think it's such a good idea. It's a luxury, I know, for people like us to always be working on other languages. Phenomenal. You get a better insight. And it's good to be in my situation. Language I know fairly well, German, French, one where I'm kind of in the middle, and others where I'm not really good. Gosh, when I speak Mandarin, people just stare at me, then they start to giggle. I just keep going. Okay, great question. Great questions are the ones I've already thought about and I have a ready answer. So what's the next one?
Fantastic. So one of the things I was going to ask you, because I think it was in the second paper that you had sent, you mentioned, okay, so there was this parting of the ways with the natural approach, and you mentioned what I understand to be a pure comprehension approach, I think is the way that you put it. Could you expand a little about that?
Well, I just described one for you.
Okay.
It means we're going to take optimal input. Actually, that's an expression that Benico found in a book I wrote nearly 20 years ago that I'd forgotten about. And she reread the chapter and said, we should work on this. Good idea. And that means the most efficient. It's comprehensible. It's very interesting. There's a lot of it, and it's rich in language. The language supports your comprehension. Context really helps a lot. We want a method. We should at least try a method. We've gone through several stages. The first stage, each stage I think was commendable. We discovered that comprehensible input approaches were more effective than the old-fashioned grammar approaches. I did a long kind of meta-analysis of this, I think in 2007, published in an obscure place, and only 4 people found it. You know how it is. That's what gives you prestige in the field. So I wrote a paper reviewing the research, and I found comprehensible input, and this was natural approach, TPR, all these TPRS, all these things did work better than the old-fashioned grammar approaches. So then people were saying, okay, let's cover all our bets. Let's do a little of each. And what we're doing now is anything is good as long as it's comprehensible input. You know, let all groups, you know, be welcome under our great tent. In the last couple of years, we're beginning to think that's not good enough. We can do a lot better. And Benico's been the champion of convincing me that I think she's absolutely right. We want a pure comprehensible input approach. And that's going to be better than any old thing. So people say, well, in my class, yeah, we'll tell stories, but I'll teach them how to play a musical instrument. We'll teach them self-defense. We'll teach dance. We'll sing songs. And it's all more or less comprehensible, but it's not optimal. The songs don't have a lot of language. It's not efficient, a word that Benico has really emphasized, I think. And if we're really serious, we want the most efficient ways, pure optimal input. The data we have so far from our papers seems to be the way. So far, who knows, tomorrow we may find something else. But right now, it's only comprehensible input, not grammar instruction. I'll put in a good word for grammar in a moment, modestly good word. And we want the best kind of comprehensible input. We owe that to our students. And now you're going to segue to the next question, which I will not allow you to ask because I'm going to ask it. What about grammar? Is grammar forbidden? I can't mute you, but I can try. Okay. Anyway, what power? Yes. Is grammar wrong? Is it bad? I'm quoted as saying you should never teach grammar. No, I don't think grammar is wrong. I don't think it's evil. I would never say teach grammar, go to jail. Grammar is very limited. That's the point. It's hard to learn, hard to remember, hard to use. We have hypothesized that if you want to use grammar to monitor your output, which is how we think it happens, conditions have to be met which are really tough to meet. You got to know the rule, and Noam Chomsky will tell you he doesn't know all the rules of English, even the great grammarians don't. People who write grammar books don't know as many rules as Chomsky. The best language teachers, I say the best, the ones who know the most grammar, don't teach all the rules they know. The best students don't understand all the rules, and they don't remember all the rules. So we've got a small group of grammar rules that's really teachable, and it's the simple ones that people can remember. Even the best grammar students ever, the best ones I've seen when I was teaching at USC over the summer, teaching international students and all that, the best ones were the engineers, the mathematicians, the chemists, because they were used to technical stuff and really disciplining to get it. They had like 10 years of grammar in their own language, and they knew the rules. They liked them. They got confused. They could handle the third person singular. They can handle the regular past. When you talk about the contrary to fact conditional, what was that? Okay. So there are limits because of the complexity. Also, you can't use the rules in conversation very easily. If you want to use grammar in conversation, you've got to be thinking about correctness, which is a burden. It's kind of like, it's unnatural, patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time. Very hard to do. So, it inhibits what you're going to say, etc. Also, during conversation, you don't have much time. Drag up the rule. All you can do is the simplest kinds of rules. That's all. So 3 conditions. You got to know the rule. You got to be thinking about the rule, and you got to have time. The only time these conditions are met is when you give people a grammar test. That's our research back in the 80s. That's what we found. Grammar tests are when people use grammar and they don't use that much of it. There's an exception to all this. Even for very well read native speakers or near native speakers of English, I'm sure you can think of exceptions in other examples in other languages. There are some rules of English that people like me have not quite acquired, and you're supposed to know them, or you can be embarrassed. My favorite one is the it's distinction, the apostrophe S or not. These kinds of rules are leaving the language. We're watching a language change because we see lots of mistakes in life, in signs, etc. When I write, I have to look it up. I'd say about 20% of the time, I'm not sure. When I see it, I know which one is right. Okay, but these are the ones that are going out, and it's a good idea to monitor your writing and put it through a spell check, make sure you're not embarrassed. And this is the only time, I think, when we ever need to think about conscious grammar. So grammar, fine. Okay, another function of grammar, you tell people the rules, you give analysis. What sometimes happens when I was teaching, some student would say, yeah, that's right. Like I remember someone asked me about the progressive. John is playing the violin. I said, well, it's ambiguous. It could mean, what's that in the other room, that noise? John is playing the violin. What's John doing next week? He's playing the violin in the symphony. It could be near future. And this one student in class said, hey, that's true. It is ambiguous that way. He had already acquired it. And that gave him some admiration for what he has done, some confidence in his ability to acquire language. So that's not a complete waste of time. And the study of linguistics on its own, which I think is mostly nothing to do with language teaching, is gorgeous. Intellectually, it's beautiful. Chomsky's hypothesis that if something is universal, it's innate. Wow. But in language teaching, no. I had a conversation with Noam Chomsky last month on the computer. It was a conference. He gave a speech. I made a comment, and I basically said what I just told you, that it's wonderful stuff, but it's not going to help you very much in language teaching. He totally agreed. It was very satisfying because it's some of these grammar people who have been my biggest critics and think I should try to apply Chomsky's work to language teaching. Well, I have in a sense, but in terms of the details of grammar, it was very gratifying. So check it out. It's on YouTube on my channel. 6 minutes. Lifetime dream, having a conversation with the master himself. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, next question.
Great, fantastic. Well, one of the things I want to ask is, I'm going to slightly play devil's advocate here, because here in our teaching context here in Argentina, there are probably either many schools or most schools and institutes will be teaching based around a structural syllabus. Rightly or wrongly, let's say grammar can be king in our culture. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how it would be to actually make sure that the schools that we work at can adopt a more optimal input hypothesis approach, as it were, to teaching, if they are sort of, I'm going to say, governed by a structural syllabus.
Well, we're in the middle of a paradigm shift. I can't change the theory. It doesn't work. I can't change the acquirer's brain. We can change school. But I realize it's hard to do. I've talked to textbook people writing textbooks. They say, if we use your stuff, no one's going to buy it. Because people's personal theories of language acquisition are not the same as what you've come up with. That's why I'm giving you this webinar for free, okay? I want to get the ideas around. It's my one chance to do it because nobody can afford it anyway, okay? Nobody's got any money. I'm taking advantage of that, of getting the word out. My goal right now is limited. I don't want to, I know I can't convince people that the optimal input way is the absolute best way. I think it is. But what I want to do is raise some awareness to tell people that it exists. Maybe they'll try it out. Maybe they'll examine their own experiences as language acquirers, and they'll start to appreciate the power of language acquisition. I said before, the brain does language acquisition very well. Everybody fails at conscious learning, and they continue to blame themselves. So maybe people will start putting 2 and 2 together. My real hope is that a major respected public figure like Justin Bieber will tell everyone that it's right, and then we will have won, okay? So I sympathize, it's a slow change, and I would tell teachers, do a little more, Frank Smith's advice, do a little more of what works and a little less of what doesn't.
Well, speaking of Justin Bieber, because I'm sure most of the teachers, probably all of the teachers here in the room with us today will have come across a situation where they have been teaching with a grammar-based syllabus, for example, and a student will say, oh, but what about this? And they will have heard, for example, a different, how can I put this, realization of the third conditional. I have a friend from England, for example, who is a little bit younger than me, who frequently says, for example, if I'd have known that, I would have blah, blah, blah. And the way
what's wrong with that? It sounds fine to me.
Yeah, well, exactly. And the way we teach it here, we teach it in a different way. And one of the things that I was wondering is if there is because a lot of younger people perhaps aren't so interested in reading books, but they are fascinated by TV series, for example. and are very, very happy to watch, like, to binge watch, I don't know, 6, 7 episodes of Game of Thrones or something like that, and will then come into class with questions about the language that they've heard the previous evening. And we'll have the subtitles on in English, but reading with the subtitles. And this might be a little far-fetched, but would you consider that something that we could consider reading that has been chosen by them?
Yeah, it does count, first of all. Certainly it counts. You're not going to get much of it, though. It is not, the quantity is not quite there. We hope someday to get them involved in, reading Game of Thrones novels or comic books or whatever. That if you get the right books, they're going to read. That's why I like comic books. Did you know, I have not praised myself enough in this talk, and you have not done enough, so I'm going to supplement it. I am the world's #1 expert in comic book research. It's true because I'm the only one doing it, I think. I win by default. I even had lunch with Stan Lee. Can you imagine that? The inventor of Spider-Man who changed the world with comic books. I think comics are fabulous. Once you start, you really can't put them down. I think graphic novels are unbelievably good. They're all too expensive. There's too much violence and too much showing body parts and all that, but it's really, really good stuff. And I like the Marvel movies. I like the philosophy behind them, etc. It's very good literature as well. It's today's literature. So I'm in favor of all that. I think if we make these things available, they're going to read them. A study was done about 15 years ago, native speakers of English. They put comic books, graphic novels in a junior high school library, but didn't allow them to circulate. Circulation nearly doubled in the next couple of months. The amount of books taken out went up magnificently. Once they're available, they will read them. I would not give up. Gee, I don't like to read. They haven't found the right stuff. So yes, the movies, I have great respect for movies. And I'm the only one in North America who's never watched Game of Thrones. I don't know. Just since Star Trek went off, what's the point of television? Anyway, this is still good stuff, and we hope it will get them into reading. Eventually, reading is the way it's going to happen, but I wouldn't eliminate all the others. The problem with hearing alternative forms in casual speech is that you've been teaching grammar. So when someone says something alternatively, you can say, I'm going to explain this, but you guys who don't want to hear this, you can just close your eyes for a few minutes and you talk about the so-called standard form, the so-called casual form, how it differs, how dialects evolve, how one thing that wasn't grammatical becomes grammatical, language changes, and that's an invitation for a linguistics discussion, sociolinguistics, historical linguistics. But just let it go, otherwise. They'll get bored with you talking about it anyway.
Well, yeah, now I think we're coming on to the practical sort of in-class aspect of it now. Because imagine a situation where in some institutes here we have relatively few students. In some schools, I'm sure some teachers will agree with me there. Some classes you have 40, 45, upwards of 60 students in a class. And how would you suggest, or how can we support either the students and the teachers who want to do self-selected reading in a massive class that size? What's our role there?
Well, I've made your life much easier, in my opinion. First of all, at the beginning stage, this has come up. I've been on panel discussions. Now that we're doing everything on the internet and all this stuff, what about teaching? What happens to teaching? Well, in terms of beginning language teaching, you're better off. The use of the computer and webinars and lessons like that is that what works is easy to do. You can tell stories, which is what the core of language acquisition. The stuff that we think doesn't work is impossible to do anyway. Have students get their errors corrected in class. Have them talk more. We don't acquire by speaking. We acquire by listening and reading. They don't have to talk. Okay, how do you make sure they understand? How do we do comprehension checking? Beniko and I have argued that you don't need to do comprehension checking Comprehension checking is usually very annoying anyway. You interrupt the class and you ask a student, did you understand that? What does blah, blah, blah mean? And it's like having a test every 2 minutes. So they're no longer listening to the message. The way to do this is to have a class. First of all, if you're going to have, today is a story. Ideally, and we can pull this off, if we're using the computer, today can be any one of 10 stories. Take your pick at different levels. And if the one you're listening to is boring or incomprehensible or both, you can change the station. You can try another one, just like you don't have to finish every book you start. This stuff is made for us. We can do very well with this. The idea of GSSR, guided self-selected reading, can also work nicely. The students can get our guidance, and this can be done by conference, which we do very easily. 3-minute conference, the student can ask a question, can you recommend a book, blah, 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 or they can drop you a message. Then you can always talk to students about this. You don't have to meet them as a group. Most of the time, they're reading on their own and checking in with you. Benico asks students to keep a log, just what did you read? And maybe a sentence, what you thought about it, and they can write it in Spanish. Doesn't matter, as long as they keep reading more. We don't need class until, when we're done with them, when they're already reading literature, when they're already reading stuff they select, they think is important, they don't need us anymore for beginning language teaching. And that's my job, beginning language teaching. The goal of beginning language teaching is to bring you to the point where you're autonomous. You don't need teachers. You don't need us. We don't need return business. There's always enough new customers who want to be beginners in a language. Our job is over. Then the job is different. It's the job of teaching literature, which is another discussion. How do you teach literature using, the computer, etc.? That's another discussion. But language teaching, we've got it made. It's easy.
Well, I have a question for you about the other side of input. After input, the concept of input plus one, of course, Meryl Swain comes along and talks about comprehensible output as well. And given what we're talking about with students reading and self-selecting and the optimal input hypothesis, where would you say that the production stage of that?
Okay, you've asked two questions in one. One is what about production? And the other is what about comprehensible output? Let me do production first. Production is the result of language acquisition, period. Lots of input, people will start producing. You can't get them to stop. They won't do it right away. One of my favorite stories is Werner Leopold, a bilingual scholar from Germany, and he and his family moved to California. With his younger daughter, he always spoke German to her all the time. As soon as she started going to school, meeting her little friends, she started answering in English. He let it go, fine. It went like that for years. And they had a wonderful father-daughter relationship. They did things together, long talks, just what, as a dad, just what I'd like, which I do have. But back and forth, warm relationship. The child spoke English. Leopold spoke German to her all the time, heavy conversations. He never heard her speak German until she was 17 and they went on a trip to Germany. You know what's going to happen next. She went to a party. She met this nice young man. He was amazed to hear all this German coming out of her mouth. I don't speak these other languages very often. I live in Southern California. The only one I ever speak to anybody is Spanish, okay? Occasionally I'll run into an Ethiopian, that's funny. When I do speak German, I spoke German last month before the coronavirus at a drugstore, at a pharmacy, and the lady behind the counter was German. So of course, they'll be get to see nipples and see how we start our conversation. And she assumed I was a native speaker. How long have you been here? I was doing great. I haven't spoken German in 2 years to anybody. And I really haven't spoken German since the early 1960s, before your grandmother was born, when I was a student in Austria, okay? But it was still there because I do all this, junk reading all the time. I confess, in German, it's hard to find things. So I've been reading Star Trek in translation, which are really nice. They do great covers in German. Anyway, so I was fine. This has happened to you. You keep reading in the language and you haven't spoken it in a long time, you're actually better. You don't need to practice speaking all the time. You need to keep getting input. Now, comprehensible output is a hypothesis invented by the loyal opposition, Meryl Swain, who were pretty good friends. We get along pretty well in this. And she says the way you acquire language is you try to say something, the other person doesn't understand. So you try again, you change it around. The other person still doesn't. Finally, you get it right. So you say something like, j'y allais beaucoup de fois. Comment? Je comprends pas. J'ai 10 fois. Oh, je suis allé. Oh, maintenant je comprends. You say, finally, you get it. And that's how you acquire the distinction. Well, the problem with this, I wrote a paper on this. It's 1.5 pages. It's called Comprehensible Output, ? It's on my website, sdkrashen.com. Operators are standing by. Just download it, no charge. Don't ask my permission. Share it with anyone except Donald Trump. He won't read it anyway. But in the paper, I argue comprehensible output doesn't happen very often. How many times in your life have you been in that situation? It's never happened to me, where the person didn't understand until I got it right. The only time you see it is when we set up an artificial situation in a classroom. Otherwise, it's nearly non-existent. And the only study that worked, there was only one study where it had any effect, and it was only a couple of kids. And they used the regular past. And the people they were talking to in English were language teachers. So every time they tried the regular past and they got it wrong, or the irregular form, they used the regular form, the person would say, I don't understand. So they try again until they got it right. And they were a little better on the post-test. Well, you can't study English very long without studying that in school. And it's late acquired. My guess, they had learned it in school, had not acquired it. The correction or the confusion prompted them to monitor and correct their mistake. There was no evidence that it was acquired, none whatsoever. They really weren't that much better. They were not significantly better than the control kids. So I think it's an interesting idea. I think it deserves to be tested, etc. But there is zero evidence that it works and very little evidence to even think that it might work. So I've just disposed of all the output hypotheses, I think.
I do see what you're saying, and again, I'm going to play devil's advocate and say that.
That means he disagrees. I got you.
Yeah, you got me. You got me again.
You got you good.
Does that not, to a certain extent, possibly, does that not clash with a student's motivation as well, in terms of wanting to learn a language to communicate in another language? And if we're saying that it must be, the comprehensible input is, I'm going to, again, horribly paraphrase you, comprehensible input is king, then the students really, they want to learn another language. I'm going to massively generalize just for a change, to communicate, to speak in another language. And I wonder if that's at odds, therefore, with their motivation.
Very, very good question, actually. It comes up a lot. It's a very serious one. I wrote a paper called The End of Motivation. Motivation doesn't count. You're teaching middle school kids for, 12-year-olds English class. And you say to them, you really better work hard and pay attention in class because someday you're going to have to use English. They don't care. It never works. They want to be out skateboarding with their friends. They don't want, it doesn't matter. But if you tell them a story, and the story is really good, and it has to do with their daily life, etc., like a kind of Harry Potter thing where it's just totally captivating. Young people's literature is just sensational, in my opinion. they will acquire whether they want to or not. That's the trick. To be motivated for a language doesn't matter. You want to understand stories and understand what people are telling you. The rest comes. Our job is to give people compelling input. So compelling, they'll forget about motivation. They'll forget they're in a language class. That's the idea.
Do you think it will be an interesting idea, because storytelling has made I'm going to say it's made a massive comeback. I'm not saying it ever really went away, storytelling, but in terms of teaching, not only that, but any kind of non-fictional business setting, when people are telling stories, they're talking about something that's happened to themselves. It suddenly becomes very interesting. I was watching, it's very difficult to get bored in a TED talk anyway, but I was watching quite a long one the other day. And I felt as soon as my attention started slipping, the guy would start telling a story. And as soon as he did, it was like, whoa, my attention was like straight back.
I've gone through the same transition. My wife has been urging me to tell more stories. So I've been doing that more and more. And a guy named Jim Trelease has helped me, Trelease. He wrote a book called the Read Aloud Handbook. And he has been to California from the East Coast, and he's spoken here, and we always spend time. My family thinks he's the greatest dinner guest of all time because he tells stories all the time. He's wonderful. In fact, I will recommend his book now, the Read Aloud Handbook, and give you the strongest recommendation. I had a copy of the Read Aloud Handbook in my office, and my mom saw a copy and she said, "Can I borrow this?" Sure. Now I got to tell you, my mom and I had, again, this wonderful relationship. My mother and I just got along perfectly. She admired me and my work, which is great. She borrowed the Read Aloud Handbook, brought it back and said to me, "Stephen, why can't you write like this?" I said, "I wish I could. You get a convincing guy, and he has started all of North America using stories more. So you get something like that. And the TED Talk phenomena, I think, has had a very big influence. It's coming back. It's also good for your social life. I'll give some social life advice. You're invited to a party. You know you're not going to know anybody. What do? You go out and watch the last 3 hit movies. You can go up to anybody and say, "Oh, I just saw Terminator 28. And someone will say, "Oh, I saw that. Wasn't that great?" The movies are stories. They're drama. They're theater. And they are mostly masterful. And everybody likes them. We're now beginning to appreciate stories. And I'm saying stories are the basis of language acquisition. We need to do that beginning and intermediate. And you don't have to read everything. You don't need to don't be tested. Just read a lot. I do recommend the work of Donalyn Miller. She has some good answers to these questions. She wrote a book called The Book Whisperer. I really like it because she quotes me a lot. But aside from that, she has a way of merging stories and free independent reading with subject matter, which I really think is clever and useful. She got this idea. She was teaching in Fort Worth and was teaching English to the junior high school kids around 11, 12 years old. And the syllabus she got from the district said, "You're going to first cover biography, the genre of biography." And who cares, The assignment she gave the children, 25 in the class, let's say, read 3 biographies, any 3 you decide. So it's self-selected. So again, it could be a rock and roll singer, it could be an actor, it could be an athlete. Kids came in having read 60, 70 biographies. The discussions were fantastic. They heard about other kids, what they read. She said in her classes, she required about 40 books. The average number that kids read, 55. This is the way of marrying self-selected reading you want to read, and the curriculum. If I were teaching history and doing World War I would say read 3 things about World War I, or you can watch 1 movie and read 2 books. That's where we get our knowledge. So these are ways of solving this, I think.
It's very interesting you said the other day about the way I learned history, for example, was all, 1066 and all that, names, dates, places, which were then regurgitated. And then we started watching the series Vikings.
Ah,
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. No. It's like it suddenly came to life. And of course, they've all done their research, they've done their homework about it. And I was saying, like, if I had learned history this way, I would have been gripped, absolutely gripped.
exactly. Fiction is the core. And you could do it the other way. You first get involved in these books, then you look it up to see what really happened or what people say about it. Yeah, most of what we know comes from novels, which is why people like Trump make all these ridiculous mistakes. He was in Israel a few years ago. And when he was about to leave, he says, well, after this, I'm going to the Middle East. Where do you think you are? Those kinds of mistakes. He hasn't read anything. He hasn't read any novels. He hasn't read any stories about it.
Absolutely. Well, I've got an interesting question for you here. And in fact, I'm going to ask you one from one of the people who's written in the chat box at the moment. I'm going to mispronounce her name, Anaí Parra. She asked, how do you think schools will be after all of this is over, after coronavirus is over, etc.? What's your opinion on that?
All I can think of now is we'll have more respect for what can be done on the computer. And this is what I have discovered in my work. When it all started, and not only has there been a health situation, but the financial thing has been an absolute disaster everywhere. Right now, nobody has any money except for about 10 white men in North America. Nobody has any money at all. People are losing their jobs, unemployment's rampant. No one can afford anything. So we're going to free and cheap ways and discovering some of these things are really good. This is what's happened to me. So this has been a breakthrough in some ways. And I can give lectures without my pants on. This is great.
Fantastic. Well, we're coming up to time in a couple of minutes, but I've got one more question for you. For you, Stephen Krashen, I'm not going to say Dr. Krashen because
Thank you.
Sorry, no problem. I learned slowly, but I get there. For you, what would be the ideal type of school? A very general question, I know.
I can only begin the answer. The first one, whether it is paper or not, is a library. The disaster now is that everyone's cutting money. They're cutting libraries. Isaac Asimov says when you reduce library budgets, it's because America has found another way of committing suicide. The problem is poverty, as we know, and poverty is going to get a lot worse. So cities that are cutting their library are cutting off the only source of pleasure reading for kids. Kids who come from high poverty don't have books in the home. They can't afford to get books. They can't order them, whether they're on CD or downloaded or paper. They can't get them. The library is the only place. And they're cutting that the same as they're cutting everything else. Number one, library. Did I mention libraries? Libraries. The research on libraries is unbelievably strong. I'll give you the results of one study that I participated in. We did an analysis of the PEARLS examination, the one that's given every few years to 10-year-olds in countries around the world. The biggest predictor of reading scores in 10-year-olds in first language? Poverty, of course. But if you add the library into the equation, presence of a library, one study, it balanced it completely. The other, it accounted for about 40% of the difference. Libraries make up, some extent at least, the effect of poverty. So the first thing I would do, ideal school, I would look at the library and make sure it's open and functioning in any form you want to do it. If it's all electronic, we make sure kids have players for all this stuff and they can easily get a hold of them. That's the big one. You get that, you got a lot of the value of education.
Well, Dr. Krashen, thank you so very, very, very much for agreeing to be with us here. I was overawed when I got your email accepting, and I know that everybody else was as well. I'm going to ask you to stay on for a second more because I'm going to take a a selfie of everyone who's here in the room, including yourself. So this is going to take like a minute or so. So if I can ask everyone to come on camera for a second, that will be great. Everyone do your hair, etc. Everybody look pretty. Okay.
I'm going to become a barber, I think. Go around giving haircuts for $5 and make a fortune. This is going to be great.
Okay, one more. Okay, well, Dr. Krashen, thank you so very much again for being with us today. And I'm sure everyone would like to give you a round of applause for joining us.
Instead of the applause, I'd like people to do me a favor. 2 favors, won't cost you anything. Follow me on Twitter, Krashen. Again, I want to catch up to Justin Bieber. That's the goal. But Twitter is great. Twitter is where I announce new research of my own and other people's. Occasionally a silly joke, okay? But that's what it's for. It's professional. It's a very good thing. I'm also on Facebook if you want to do it that way. Twitter's quick and easy. And the other is take advantage of sdkrashen.com and take a look at the papers. I'll tell you what I'm doing with publication, a new policy. All papers that I write are short. Nobody has time for long papers. The whole thing of the old days of a long literature survey and, you know, this is how you should run your life in the next research study, and far too complicated statistics, all these things, simple. My model is a paper that won the Nobel Prize, Crick and Watson, for the double helix. Beautiful paper, probably the most quoted paper of all time by scientists. You know, it's the one with that funny diagram. This is how DNA and RNA work and all this. A page and a half in Nature. The whole discussion at the end, the implications of this for blah, blah have occurred to us. If you need a long literature survey, you shouldn't be reading the paper. So that's number one. I now only publish in what are called open access journals. Journals that are free to the writer and free to the reader. I don't publish books anymore because nobody can afford them, okay? So what's the point? I think the publishers and the journal people have to find a new, more honest way of making a living. I'm sorry, it's not working anymore. No one can afford your stuff. I get a lot of invitations to review for journals, and I like doing it. I think it's a professional responsibility. People have done it for me. But my policy now is I will not review a paper if it's more than 5 pages. I have not reviewed a paper in 6 years. They're all much too long. I can't get through them. And I have more free time than anybody else I know, and I can't get through the research I'm supposed to read. So short and free, kind of the Bernie Sanders idea, like he thinks higher education should be. And this is spreading. A colleague of mine in India is doing it and did a big editorial in the Hindu newspaper. Mathematics is doing this. My son is the one who's told me about it. A former winner of the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in mathematics is doing this. So join the club, read the short stuff. If you're a scholar, try writing short stuff. Then I can read it. Okay, thanks.
A couple of people have asked if you have Instagram.
No, I do, but I haven't used it, and it confuses me. I get messages from people, and I think there are about 25 different ways of sending messages. And I'm discovering it, and people keep sending me this stuff, and I can't keep track of it because I don't know how it works. So I don't want to get involved with Instagram. My life is too short. So sorry. I do have email, skrashen@yahoo. But if you write me, keep it short.
That was my mistake, wasn't it?
I'm sorry, I cannot review your term paper. And I get requests like, I hear you've done something interesting, second language. Can you tell me about it? No, I can't.
Okay. Well, thank you very much again. I also want to thank Advice Digital for providing the platform and all the help with organizing everything. So thank you everyone for being here on We're All in This Together. Thank you very much again, so much, Dr. Stephen Krashen.
I have another demand.
Oh,
For both of you. If our paths ever cross, real, you owe me coffee.
got it. Got it. You're
Okay.
done.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Great
Okay.
pleasure. Had a good time.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Enjoy
Bye.
your weekend. Bye.